It started with a simple envelope, plain, unmarked, and left on the edge of Ms. Carter's desk, like a whisper from the past. She almost didn't notice it, buried under a pile of lesson plans and graded essays, but something about it caught her eye. Maybe it was the way it sat there, as if waiting for her. Maybe it was the feeling that the past had finally come knocking. Ms. Carter had been a teacher for over 15 years, guiding countless students through literature, history, and the confusing moments of their teenage years. She had seen students come and go, some leaving lasting impressions, others fading into memory. But as she picked up the envelope, a strange unease settled in her chest. There was no name, no return address, just her own name scrawled in handwriting she couldn't quite place. She hesitated before opening it. Her classroom was empty now, the last of her students having left for the day. The soft hum of the hallway lights and the distant sound of lockers slamming echoed through the air. She could feel the weight of the letter in her hands, heavier than it should have been. Taking a deep breath, she slid a finger under the flap and pulled out a single sheet of paper, yellowed at the edges, as if it had been waiting for years to be read. The first line made her heart stop. "You probably don't remember me, but I remember you." Ms. Carter swallowed, her eyes scanning the words, as a chill ran down her spine. She had received thank you notes before, messages from students who had gone on to do great things. But this letter felt different. There was something raw in the handwriting, something urgent. "I needed to write this because you were the only person who ever really saw me. You didn't know it at the time, but you changed everything." Her grip tightened on the paper. Who was this from? She could think of dozens of students who had passed through her classroom, each with their own struggles, their own stories. Some had been easy to reach, eager to learn, but others had been slipping through the cracks, lost in the chaos of high school life. Had she missed something? Had there been a student who needed her more than she realized? The letter continued, each word pulling her deeper into a memory she hadn't yet uncovered. "I used to sit in the back row, hoping no one would notice me. I wasn't the best student, and most days, I barely had the energy to care. But then, there was you. You didn't treat me like I was invisible." Ms. Carter's breath hitched. How many students had felt this way? She had always tried her best, but she knew the reality. Some students slipped away, no matter how much she reached out. And now, years later, someone was reaching back. The next line sent a shiver through her. "There was a day I almost didn't come back to school. I had decided there was no point. No one would notice if I was gone. But then, you stopped me in the hall. You said something so simple. I don't even know if you remember. You said, 'Hey, I'm glad to see you today.'" A lump formed in Ms. Carter's throat. It was such a small thing, a passing comment, something she had likely said to dozens of students without thinking twice. But to this person, it had mattered. It had been enough to change everything. She set the letter down for a moment, pressing a hand against her forehead. The weight of it all was overwhelming. How often had she second-guessed herself, wondering if she was really making a difference? Teaching was more than textbooks and essays. It was about the moments in between, the small gestures, the quiet acknowledgements. But the letter wasn't finished. "I wanted to say thank you, but I was too scared back then. So I'm saying it now. Thank you for noticing me. Thank you for reminding me that I mattered." The last few words blurred as tears filled Ms. Carter's eyes. She had spent years pouring herself into her students, never knowing if her efforts truly stuck. And now here was proof. Proof that even the smallest moments could leave echoes that lasted a lifetime. But then, at the very bottom of the page, there was something else. Something that sent a fresh wave of unease through her. "One more thing. There's something I need to tell you. Something I never could before. But you have to find me first." Her heart pounded. the air in the room suddenly felt heavier, charged with a strange energy. The letter had been unsigned, with no clue as to who had written it, and yet it was asking her to remember, to put the pieces together. Ms. Carter stared at the page, her mind racing. Who was this student? What had they been through? And most importantly, what was it they still needed to say? She had a feeling she was about to find out. 6. Carter sat frozen at her desk, the letter trembling slightly in her hands. The words echoed in her mind. You have to find me first. It wasn't just a thank you note. It was something more, a message from the past, calling her towards something unresolved. But how could she find someone when she didn't even know where to start? Her mind raced through faces, voices, fragments of memories. She had taught hundreds of students over the years, each carrying their own struggles. Some had been outspoken, eager to be heard. Others had hidden in the background, hoping to disappear. If the writer had been one of the latter, they could be anyone. The school was nearly empty now, the last few students and teachers filtering out into the evening. Ms. Carter glanced out the window at the dimming sky, a heavy feeling settling in her chest. Something about this letter felt urgent, like a door creaking open to a past she had forgotten, or maybe one she had never fully seen. She pulled out an old yearbook from her desk drawer, flipping through the pages slowly. Faces stared back at her, some familiar, some blurred by time. Could one of them be the person who had written this letter? Had she missed something back then? Something that had been right in front of her? The problem was, teachers weren't supposed to have favorites, but she had always carried certain students in her heart long after they left. There was Daniel, the quiet boy who had always looked exhausted, his eyes dark with something unspoken. There was Emily, who wrote beautiful poetry, but never let anyone read it. And there was Jason, who sat in the back row with his hood up, barely speaking unless called on. Her fingers paused on Jason's picture. He had transferred in the middle of the school year, rarely engaged, and then one day, he was just gone, moved away, she had been told. No details, no goodbyes. She had thought about him over the years, wondering where he had ended up, if he had ever found his place. Could it be him? A sudden knock on the door startled her. She turned quickly, finding Mr. Langley, the school's janitor, standing in the doorway. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said with a chuckle. "You're still here?" Ms. Carter exhaled, trying to steady herself. "Yeah, She hesitated, then held up the letter. "I found this today, from a former student, but I don't know who wrote it." Mr. Langley stepped closer, adjusting the cap on his head as he glanced at the paper. "A mystery, huh?" His brow furrowed. "You think they need help?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I think they want me to remember something." The janitor nodded thoughtfully. He had been around almost as long as she had, witnessing students pass through these halls year after year. "Well," he said, leaning on his mop handle, "if they went through all the trouble of leaving that note, they must think you'll figure it out." Ms. Carter let out a small laugh, though there was no humor in it. "That's the problem. I don't know. If I can." Mr. Langley tapped his fingers against the doorway. "Sometimes, the ones who need help the most are the ones we least expect," he said. "Or the ones we forget too easily." His words settled deep in her mind. She nodded, thanking him as he left, and turned back to the yearbook. Her thoughts drifted again to Jason. She remembered the day he first walked into her classroom, his shoulders tense, his eyes wary. He rarely spoke, but she recalled the way he had lingered after class a few times, as if wanting to say something, but never finding the words. Then one day, he was just gone. No explanation, no warning. Ms. Carter pulled out her laptop, searching through old emails, trying to find any record of where he had gone. But there was nothing. No forwarding address, no new school listed, just an empty space where he used to be. She sat back, rubbing her temples. If the letter was from him, why now? Why reach out after all this time? And what was it he needed to say? The answer felt just out of reach, like a shadow at the corner of her vision. The next morning, she arrived at school earlier than usual, her thoughts still tangled with possibilities. She found herself walking toward the records office, hoping to find something, anything that could help. The secretary, Mrs. Patel, looked up in surprise. "You're here early," she said with a warm smile. Ms. Carter hesitated, then decided, "To be honest, I'm trying to track down an old student. It's important." Mrs. Patel gave her a knowing look, then motioned her closer. "Who are you looking for?" Ms. Carter took a deep breath. "Jason Reynolds. He was here a few years ago, but he left suddenly." Mrs. Patel's expression shifted, her smile fading slightly. She clicked through the school database, scanning the records. A few moments later, she sighed. "There's not much here," she admitted. "He withdrew before the end of the year, but there's no record of where he went." Disappointment settled in Ms. Carter's chest. She had hoped for more, some kind of lead. But then, Mrs. Patel hesitated. "Wait, I do remember something." Ms. Carter leaned in. "What is it?" Mrs. Patel pursed her lips. "It was odd at the time, but I didn't think much of it. His guardian, his uncle, I think, came in to handle the paperwork. He seemed rushed, like he just wanted to get it over with." A strange feeling stirred in Ms. Carter's gut. "His uncle?" "Yes," Mrs. Patel said. "I remember asking if Jason would be transferring to another school, and the uncle just shook his head, said something about starting fresh." Ms. Carter's mind reeled. Had Jason been in trouble? Had he left by choice? Or had someone taken that choice away from him? And if he was the one who wrote the letter, what did he need her to find out? The questions gnawed at her, pulling her deeper into the mystery. One thing was certain. Whoever had written that letter, they weren't just looking for closure. They were asking for help, and Ms. Carter wasn't about to ignore them. Ms. Carter couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Jason hadn't just left. He had disappeared. The letter, the rushed withdrawal, the uncle's strange behavior. It all pointed to something more. She spent the rest of the day lost in thought, barely able to focus on her lessons. The words from the letter kept repeating in her head. "You have to find me first." By the time school let out, she had made a decision. She couldn't let this go. If Jason needed her, if he had reached out after all these years, she had to try. She started by searching online, but there was almost nothing. No social media, no recent mentions. As if he had been erased. Frustrated but not ready to give up, she decided to check with the only other person who might remember him, Mr. Langley. She found him in the hallway, mopping near the lockers. "Hey, do you remember Jason Reynolds?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The janitor paused, his grip tightening on the mop. "Reynolds," he murmured, his expression darkening. "Yeah, I remember him." Ms. Carter's pulse quickened. "Did something happen?" Mr. Langley exhaled slowly. "That kid. He had it rough. Kept to himself. Always looked like he was carrying something heavy." He hesitated before adding, "His home situation wasn't great. A lot of folks turned." A blind eye, a cold chill ran down her spine. "Do you know where he went?" Mr. Langley shook his head. "One day, he was here. Next, he was gone. I always wondered if he was okay." Ms. Carter pressed her lips together. The pieces were falling into place, but she still didn't have the full picture. She needed to find out what had happened to Jason After he left, that night, she went through her old emails again, hoping she had overlooked something. Then, just as she was about to give up, she found it, a message from a few years ago, buried beneath unread newsletters and school updates. It was from an unfamiliar email address, short and cryptic. Ms. Carter, I don't know if you remember me, but I just wanted to say thank you. I'm doing better now. You were the only one who ever really saw me. I wish I had told you more back then. There was no name, no details, but she knew. It had to be Jason. Heart pounding, she replied to the email, unsure if it would even still be active. Jason, if this is you, I got your letter. I remember you. I want to know if you're okay. She hesitated, then added, You don't have to be alone. She hit send, feeling both hopeful and terrified. What if he never responded? What if it was too late? Hours passed with no reply. Then, just before midnight, her phone buzzed. One new email. She opened it, her breath catching as she read the words. Mrs. Carter, I didn't think you'd remember me. I didn't think anyone would. She swallowed hard, her fingers trembling as she continued. I left because I had to. My uncle, he wasn't a good man. I couldn't stay. I was too scared to tell anyone. But you were the one person who made me feel like I mattered. That's why I wrote to you. I needed you to know that I made it out. I'm safe now. Ms. Carter let out a shaky breath, her heart aching for the boy Jason had been. She had known he was struggling, but she had never imagined it was this bad. She typed back immediately. I wish I had known. I would have helped you. His response came almost instantly. You did help me, more than you know. I just wasn't ready to accept it back then, but I never forgot. Tears welled in her eyes. She had spent so many years wondering if she was making a difference, doubting herself, questioning if the small things even mattered. Now she had her answer. Jason was safe. He had made it. And even in his darkest moments, he had remembered that someone had seen him, that someone had cared. She stared at the screen, overwhelmed by emotion. Then, she typed one final message. I'm proud of you. The little dot indicating he was typing appeared. Then, his reply came. That means more than you know. Ms. Carter sat back, exhaling slowly. The weight she had been carrying for so long, the fear of failing, of not doing enough, began to lift. Sometimes making a difference wasn't about grand gestures. It was about the quiet moments, a kind word, a simple acknowledgement, the reminder that someone sees you. And for Jason, that had been enough. She looked at the letter one last time before folding it carefully and placing it in her drawer. A reminder that even the smallest actions can leave echoes. That noticing someone can change everything, that no one is truly invisible.